Welcome back to Res Digital, our 3-day online games festival. I'm James Batchelor, I'm UK editor at GamesIndustry.biz. You're joining us for the second session of the day, entitled Should You Go Indie After Uni? It's a look at career options that are available to people who are just about to graduate or aspiring game makers. For this, I am joined by prominent UK indie Mike Bithell, developer of Thomas Was Alone and John Wick Hex and Volume. Mike, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's all very exciting.
It's good. It'd be a damn sight harder to do without you. So, the title of the session is, should you go indie after uni? I guess perhaps we should start with, what did you do after university? Like, how did you get started in games?
So I came up, I'm trying to think when I graduated, it was probably about close to 15 years ago now, 12 maybe, something like that. So for me back then, indie wasn't really something that many people were doing. I think or at least people weren't doing visibly. Obviously there's always been kind of an indie scene, but yeah, like Introversion were printing CDs of Darwinia. You had that kind of starting, but there was not really a platform like Steam to release stuff on. So the only option back then basically was just to go and get a job. So I interviewed a few places. I went to Blitz Games, which was at the time one of the bigger British studios. We made a lot of kind of games for the Wii, PS2, that kind of era. Lots of party games, lots of the stuff your gran bought you for Christmas and you were kind of disappointed by. That was the kind of my stock in trade for a while. There were good games made there, but it's not by me. And then I was there for about 3 years. And then a friend of mine called Imre Yele went and started Bossa Studios. So I went with him to London to be his design lead. Was there for another 3 years or so. And then Thomas Was Alone kind of gave me the opportunity to kind of go indie. So I was in like what I guess traditional industry for a good kind of 5-6 years before going out there into the world.
So when did you know then that it was the right time to go independent? Obviously, there's partly kind of the opportunities that were available to you. As you say, when you first got started, there wasn't really an indie scene. But what was it that made you think, right, now is the time that I can make a game myself? I can go into business myself and be my own boss.
I think it was a combination of, as with most decisions I've made, ego and jealousy. It was basically I was basically looking at how other developers were doing. I think the one that absolutely inspired me to start was it would have been World of Goo, which the kind of the story about that was that it was I think two people from EA kind of in their spare time made a game, and then it blew up and they got to go and kind of continue with it. And I remember playing that game on my lunch break on the work computer, which probably I wasn't meant to be doing, but I did it. Sorry. If you're watching my former boss. And I remember playing that and then hearing that story and thinking, wow, we're allowed to make games on our own. Like that hadn't occurred to me. It was a mind-blowing idea, even though now it seems, like very obvious. So I looked into it and started kind of thinking about what I was going to do with it and started making hobby games. And going back to kind of back then, I'd not coded anything since I was a student. So going back to like my student kind of skill set of, doing Flash games basically, and started playing with those ideas. And then, one of those did on a jam, just a 24-hour thing, made a very, very bad version of Thomas Was Alone, which for years I thought I'd successfully deleted from the internet. But thanks to there's a project where someone's basically saving all the Flash games, and they've managed to find a copy of Thomas Was Alone, so you can now play Thomas Was Alone again, the awful version I worked very hard to remove from the internet. But it's okay. I'm older now. I'm wiser. I'm happy with that being out there. I think it's interesting to see like just the terrible version.
Embrace it. Just polish it up and release it. Like, so I mean, we're into HD remasters now. So. That's
it. Yeah, $20. It's the authentic Thomas Was Alone experience. It's artisan Thomas Was Alone. So made that, and then that kind of was a hobby thing I did in the background, and then eventually that came out. It did badly. That was fine. I went back to work, and then about 6 months after the game came out, YouTubers started getting into it, started building up momentum, and that was the point where I had essentially a year's salary in the bank. Was the moment I was bold enough to go indie. So I was very, very kind of slow to do it, because I guess I've always been kind of quite careful with stuff like that. Growing up without much money, like you definitely get used to like being careful and cautious with your spending. So I really didn't quit my day job until I was, relatively sure I could at least get a year to try and make something. And then the next thing was volume, and every project's been like that, just like keeping going as long as the universe allows me to do. And we've been very lucky with the company and done lots of stuff. Fun.
So I guess on that note, like what should students, graduates, or indeed anyone who is thinking of going from kind of either unemployed or established job to, right, I'm going to be an independent developer, what do they need to consider? So you obviously had made sure you were financially stable, you had enough saved up that you could afford. I mean, well, that alone, like how far ahead should you be planning to support yourself?
I don't think there's anything wrong with considering like long-term finances. I think that's cool. I used to be really kind of strongly opinionated on this subject. When I talk to students, I used to say, like, definitely don't go indie, right? Don't do it. It's stupid. Most indie games flop. It's a terrible way to kind of start a career. And I think to some extent, and we can talk about that more, like, I think there are still lots of reasons not to do it. But at the same time, every single like successful artist in history has ignored some old guy telling them not to do the thing. And I definitely kind of got a sense of that as I've given that talk, that like at some point I'm gonna say that to an indie, and they're gonna ignore me and go, no, screw you, I'm gonna do whatever I want. And they're gonna go and make a great game that absolutely blows everyone away. For every example of playing it safe in the way we have, there are counterexamples of just like, Rami's the obvious one, of just someone who just kind of dropped out of uni and the first thing he made with Vlambeer kind of just blew up. And then you have folks like the Superhot guys, again, just kind of out of nowhere, absolute barnstormingly successful game. So I moderate it, but yeah, I don't think it's daft to think about long-term financial planning and to go, well, how long is it realistically going to take me to make the game? Probably, like every game developer in history, I'm stupid and I'm gonna mess up and it's gonna take longer, or I'm gonna make a mistake. Every game is delayed. We just don't announce all the delays. So like, how do you schedule that up? How do you plan for that? How do you make sure that you can keep going, essentially? So effectively, it's just about staying alive and having food to eat while you make the game you're making. What's interesting is a really good counter argument to like save up is your financial responsibilities are much lower when you're younger, when you're just starting out. Theoretically, maybe you don't have a family yet, maybe you don't have long-term medical things you have to keep an eye on and all this kind of stuff. When you're just starting out, you might actually be at your most safe point to get by on baked beans for a bit. I made Thomas Was Alone while having a job, but I was living in London and it wasn't a very well paid job. So I was kind of living on those £3 lunch deals. It's not glamorous, but you can make those kind of compromises, when you're in your 20s or when you're just starting out, that maybe you can't make later. So it's a nuanced one, but I would always suggest having a plan, or knowing very, very clearly that you don't have a plan, rather than just kind of ignoring and hoping that it just all works out. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So I guess, like, besides financial considerations and making sure you can support yourself, like, what other things should people be thinking about before they decide, yes, I'm going to go independent, I'm going to make an indie studio? Like, what do they need to prepare for, I guess?
The really obvious one is can you do it? Like, in terms of, can you make the thing? And being concise with that. Like, if you look at, I think, like, independent film has a longer history, obviously, than kind of independent games. They've existed, again, like I said before, but the distribution channels weren't kind of available enough that was a mainstream kind of endeavor. As long as independent films have existed, I look at the example I always go back to is Kevin Smith, is with Clerks. Like, literally, the dude wanted to make a film. He didn't have any money, didn't have any actors, didn't have any locations to shoot. So he looked around himself and he went, okay, I have access to this store I work in and the store next door. And I can probably talk my boss into letting me film at night. So if I have a scene at the start of the movie which establishes why the blinds are shut, then I can make something here. Production value is all the stuff on the shelves already. As long as I don't open too many Doritos jars, the boss is going to be okay. And I'll put my mates in it. And I've got this one friend who's very good at this kind of joke, so I'll have that friend do that joke, and this friend who does this, and just kind of built out from what was available to him. I think that's often a kind of a lesson that I think, indie starting out are often very, very ambitious, which is cool. And again, ignore me if you'd like, because you're probably the person who's going to make a massive MMO all by yourself, and I'm going to look like an idiot. But like knowing what your limitations are and what available things are makes a lot of sense. So looking at what are you good at? What's the thing that you can do that the other people around you can't do? What's the thing that makes you unique and your team unique? And what do you have access to? This is something we still as a company think about, you know. Subsurface Circular was a game we made recently, which did really well for us, which was entirely born out of the reality that we had very little in the way of like coders or technical people around. We had a lot of artists with nothing to do, and I can write relatively quickly. So we went, okay, with that pool of resources, essentially, what can we get made that justifies all of our salaries? What can we get done? So we made something that was very script heavy, very text heavy, with some nice artwork that used Unity had just added video playback to the engine, and we knew that it was going to take every game that used Unity about 2 years to get made. So that video feature wasn't going to be in anyone else's games for a while when we launched. So we went, okay, let's bring that feature in from the engine. So these are the people we have. This is the tech we have that no one else is going to be able to use in time. And we built a game around what was available. I think that's a really smart way of kind of thinking about stuff when you're an indie. So if you're a student, if you're someone who's just starting out, what's the thing you can do that you think you're at a level that's kind of, that someone would pay for it, essentially? What's the edge you have on other creators? So that seemed to work out well for us, kind of figuring those things out. I'd suggest that.
That's something I've always been kind of interested in, like how much you should rein in your expectations. Like, so I've obviously I've spoken to indies over the years. I've spoken to graduates and student teams and so forth, and some of them, yep, absolutely, they've got a much more kind of focused core idea, and they're just exploring that. And some of them, yeah, we're going to make our own World of Warcraft, and
yeah.
You wish them luck. You do. You really want them to have luck, but equally you're aware, like, okay, yeah, you're trying to make your own World of Warcraft, but 10, 15 years ago, much larger studios were doing that, and that was when World of Warcraft was popular. So it's the
difference between getting a paper round and flying to Vegas. It's like the opportunity is massive. Like if you pull it off, you're gonna have a really good time, and everyone you work with is going to get to do whatever they want for the rest of their lives. But sometimes, playing the safer route kind of gives us longevity, and that's I think that's something that's really available to folks starting out now, is how much all of us developers who've been around for a while have talked in front of cameras like this, right? You don't necessarily have to agree with my approach to doing it, but there's someone else who maybe has, and we've I'm and the studio I created and now work with, like we're very much the slow and steady example. We're very much the kind of, you make one game and you see how that does, and then from there you build another game. And at the point a few years in where you start to get confident, maybe you start making 2 games at the same time, but very carefully. And you do this, and you do, like we've been very good at kind of taking our time, which has actually given us the security where we can take more creative risks. So our games kind of jump genre a lot. We do weird stuff. We we fly to Hollywood and convince Hollywood to let us make a John Wick game. We do odd things, but that's because we have this kind of stable kind of rhythm as a company, and that's worked well for us.
I suppose there's also value in learning lessons through your kind of earlier projects. So it's not an indie in the scale that we're talking about. It's not even vaguely indie in the sense that we're talking about. But I'd offer the example of Amplitude Studios. They made Endless Space, Endless Legend, like all those games, and now they're making Humankind. And like I spoke to them last year, and they were saying like the reason they did that was because they wanted to make this big, huge, Civ beating, historical simulator, a strategy game, but they didn't have the skills, they didn't have the ability. So we'll do Endless Space, and that will teach us how to do this type of mechanic. We'll do Endless Legend, that'll teach us how to do this type of mechanic. And now they can take all that together and put it together. I guess that's something that students and aspiring indies should be thinking about. Is, all right, we'll do the smaller projects to begin with the idea of combining those learnings.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think the thing that you don't necessarily have perspective on when you're first starting out is that you have a whole career. Like you do get to make the game of your dreams maybe 2 or 3 games from now. And I think that's cool. I think often people assume we're very good as, I think it's actually like a thing that the human brain does really well, where we kind of are very good at spinning a narrative around things that happened and saying that was manifest destiny, right? Thomas Was Alone was clearly the game Mike always wanted to make, and he always wanted to make it like this, and that's why it did well and sold well and was well received. But that's not true at all. Thomas Was Alone was just the only thing I thought I could realistically get built in the time I had available. And the story was done like in the last 2 months because I couldn't get the text to render right, you know, and all of this, like, and that practicality, like no one cares after the fact. So yeah, I agree. Like, I think taking your time, working out which things you can make now that will, like I say, give you the opportunity to learn, give you the opportunity to make some money that will support kind of your future development, makes a lot of sense. And I think that's the other thing, is learning as a part of it, knowing that you are at this moment the stupidest you will ever be, hopefully. Like you don't have the experience, you will. Future you is going to be much smarter. So let future you make the difficult game. You make the game you can make right now, and by making that game, you're going to be working towards becoming smarter. It's like Terminator. It's you know, it's a very kind of temporal thing. You need to like build towards the future, and I think that's something that as I get older, I am acutely aware of, and has become more of a focus. The other thing is, as you get older, and if you know it takes off, you start realizing that it's not necessarily so much about the games even as the company and the team, and company is just a group of people unless you're a monster. It's usually about, companies should be about people, so it's about training people up and having people kind of learn and grow alongside you, and that's something that I've shifted more and more as I've got older. Basically, I've stopped being quite so ego driven and quite so I need to make the best game ever to prove to everyone who ever doubted me that I'm a genius. That kind of fades off in your like early 30s, I found. Not for everyone, definitely not for everyone. And that focus has changed. And again, I'm really grateful to 20-something Mike for putting things in place that allowed me to kind of now have a team of people and be playing with those ideas and seeing what we can do.
I guess that's another thing as well, like looking at the, so going back to what you were saying about Thomas Was Alone, like looking at the success stories out there, and like if you are an aspiring indie, if you are a student who wants to become an indie developer, looking at the studio that you admire and the game that made them, but also looking at their history, like some people may well look at you and think, oh, this guy came out of nowhere, he made Thomas Was Alone, a game about rectangles, and became a millionaire. It's like, that's not the full story. Obviously, as you said earlier, like you worked at established studios, you did so many other games, you learned so much first. So like, and you know, the other classic examples, obviously like Rovio, I think like Angry Birds was something like their 57th or 59th game or something stupid.
Yeah,
like
they
that.
did more than me. They were rapid. Like they were doing like a new game every 2 weeks or 1 week, with multiple teams. Yeah, and that's the thing is it's not. There's very few artists or creatives in history that have always been successful. And this is something, especially as you make lots of games throughout your career, you definitely realize this one quite early on, that, you know, not everything is going to be loved and remembered in the same way. And it's something that definitely you pick up. And then what's reassuring is that you look through history and you see that no artist except David Bowie's achieved that, right? Every single artist you love, director, musician, artist, whatever, like they've made some good stuff that you remember, and they've made some bad stuff, and you don't remember that. You kind of, again, we mythologize, we simplify stories, and you don't remember the 3 times you saw a Spielberg movie in the 2000s and you were like, oh, yeah, because it doesn't matter because Spielberg made so many great things. So I think there's also that kind of unpacking that when you're looking at creatives you admire and going, no, they made 6 years worth of games I never played, or they made these 2 games that I think are iconic and awesome, but they made these 2 or 3 games in between that no one talks about anymore. And kind of, I think what that helps with is just kind of placing what you're doing in a more realistic context. You know, if you look at and this is something, we're on GamesIndustry.biz, right? So we were, and I think that's a really good resource, that and things like Gamma Sutra, for giving you an idea of how games are made. Often what you see, and I see this from students a lot, is people who are engaging heavily with fan media, which is cool. Like, you should be engaging with consumer media. You should know what players actually want. But often what you're getting from that is a very media trained, kind of structured approach to how we talk about ourselves. You know, I know when I go to E3 to promote a game, I've talked to the PR people for often hours beforehand to get the 5 bullet points I need to make sure I say in every interview. And once you know that, as someone who's thinking about doing this as a job, you realize that actually, you shouldn't just look at the veneer that is presented to promote games. You should be looking at the stories behind actually how they're produced. And by the way, like, if anyone wants an example of this, literally go to any game I've taken to a big press show. I guess the most recent was John Wick, and literally just put up all of the interviews side by side. You're going to find the 5 bullet points, the 5 things I absolutely had to say in every interview. And it's not that I'm being dishonest, but it is that I'm prioritizing the information that is required to promote and discuss the game. I'm not going to give you a full blow-by-blow description of my career in every single interview, because that's incredibly tiring and boring for everyone.
And as a journalist, it's incredibly tiring and boring to write up every single time as well. So
exactly. Well, that's it. Yeah.
So I guess that's an interesting point, though, is that if you're thinking of going indie, you cannot just be thinking about the game you want to make. It's everything. You have to think about running a business. You have to think about promoting that business. You have to think about promoting the game, media training yourself, essentially. You have to think about networking. You have to think about kind of, if you're going to be a team, you have to think about supporting each other. Like, I know I've rattled off a bunch there, but like, what other things do you need to think about? Like, it's not just the creative skills. What business skills do you need to think about before you're going to start your own studio?
Well, that's a lot. I mean, so much that, if I may plug, we wrote a book about it. Mike Bithell wrote a book about it.
That's fine.
Say again, sorry?
I did wonder when the book was going to come up.
Yeah, well, there you go. That's the answer to your question. Yeah, we like that. But that was, so we put a book together on the business of making games, but the specific reason we did that was basically as a gift to young Mike. That was the whole that was my reason for wanting to be involved in that and to kind of support Mike Bithell in writing that, in that there are just very basic kind of business rules and stuff that if you're just a game developer, which is itself a very skilled, awesome job that you have to work really hard to get good at and learn, you probably haven't had the time, frankly, to learn all of the business stuff as well. But yeah, it's really important. And I think everyone who's had success with kind of this awesome creative project they made early in their career has like horror stories about the terrible, terrible business choices they made in getting that out there. So I think getting any of that information you can is essential, and specifically getting lawyer, getting accountant very early on. I think often we immediately rule that out because I can't afford a lawyer. Lawyers are expensive. I've seen television. I understand that lawyers cost like $1,000 an hour, and they do. But the crucial thing about lawyers is they're also very smart, and they know that they can charge you X amount an hour later once they've made you successful, by making sure that you don't get screwed in contracts. So most lawyers, especially in something as niche and specific as the games industry, most law firms will take on indies for free often, or at a very reduced cost, just basically to get their foot in the door and have a relationship with you. It's like any long-term kind of business thing. They want your business going forward. If they think you're going to make stuff in the future that does well, they want to get to know you now when you need them, and when you can't pay. I've got the same lawyer now as I did when I wasn't paying for a lawyer. And he's made a good choice in investing there, because he gets paid now when he's negotiating, again, Hollywood licensing deals, right? So there's work down the road. Same with accountants. Often you can find access to people who will help. This also differs regionally as well. Like in the UK, law and tax at that scale is simpler. I still think you need people, but like it's simpler. If you're in America and you need to be working out your yearly kind of tax return and your medical insurance and all that stuff, this stuff becomes like life and death stuff to get right. So yeah, I think getting that stuff is great. I think also knowing it's okay to kind of have people around you who focus on that stuff. Bithell Games, it's incredibly humbly named title for a company, but it's 2 people. It's me because I'm the one who talks on the internet and has the face, and then there's Alexander Selinsky, my business partner, who does all the business. He's a former journalist, and he's someone who and also an MBA himself and kind of a business expert as well. He came in and he handles all of that stuff. It's okay. I think we're often, when we're making games, we're like, as an indie, you're like, I can't draw, I need to get an artist. I don't think often people go, I can't run a business, I need a businessman. Or businesswoman. I think that's something that we need to get more comfortable doing, and saying, actually finding people who I can surround myself and get advice from would be great. The other thing that's worth noting is that advice is out there. There are people who are really actively engaged I mean, social media like Twitter is amazing for that, just in terms of the number of people who will actually answer your question if you've got a weird business question, and you get them at the right moment when they're not really busy trying to hit a deadline. You can get amazing advice, and there's resources out there. So yeah, I don't think there's any harm in learning that stuff, because it will genuinely impact your future if you don't get that stuff right early on. I know it did me. Like, there are deals and situations I got into early in my career that were not great. And if I was a bit smarter, I wouldn't have got into them. And there's no one to blame there except myself, really. So yeah.
And during my career, as a journalist, I've spoken to a lot of kind of universities, particularly over the kind of past like 5-6 years, and a lot of them they do prepare their students for both the development side and the business side, and some of them actually kind of almost channel their students towards right by the end of this course, by the end of this games degree, or whatever they're studying, you will be able to start your own business. They even kind of run an incubator within the university where put yourself together in a team, get working, get started on a game, and then when you come out, you can just make that team a company. So it essentially kind of creating studios through the nature of study. Just want your thoughts on that approach, like because the overall, should you go indie straight after uni? Like, is that enough preparation? Obviously, I don't know the ins and outs of these specific courses, but like, would that be enough preparation of like, right, yeah, you guys are ready to run a business now?
So it's some preparation, yeah, for sure. And I mean, I guess again, like you, I don't know the syllabus, but like, I would presume there are universities that are great at it and universities that aren't so great at it. Yeah. I think this is where, on this question, I will put on my cynic's hat, just for this one, and I'll go back to being optimistic and indie like I'm always supposed to be when talking about this stuff. I think the cynical view on this is, universities look really good if companies that started by their students do well off the bat. So it's actually in the university's benefit to have students jumping in and starting their own companies. Even if most of those companies fail, the one that does well, you get to put the image of their game on your course material for about 5 to 10 years, promoting it to new people. So there is a reason for universities to push people in that direction, potentially. That's maybe not in necessarily an individual's best interest, but is in the interest of the university at large. So there's that. I think the other thing, just to play devil's advocate a little bit, and to make the case for going and working at a soulless mega corporation, is the brilliant thing about the big companies is that they presume you're going to be terrible. When you're hired as a junior for your first job in the industry, the company that's hiring you is making a bet. They're basically going, okay, what's the least we can pay this person? And they'll be bad for the first year. They'll figure stuff out. They'll work out how to work in a team. They're probably going to cause loads of interpersonal problems, and they'll be terrible at the software, and they won't know what they're doing. But after about a year, they'll have figured stuff out, and they'll be getting better, and they'll be awesome. And then we've got roughly 2 years before A, they realize they can just go somewhere else, and B, they hit that glorious must-have 3 years experience on every mid-level job in the games industry. So they're making an investment. They're basically throwing away that first year's salary and hoping that they can then get the value out of you in years 2 and 3. That's actually good for you as well. If you're not very good, which you probably won't be upon graduation, hopefully you're going to get better as you hit your first job. You can have someone else pay for that education, or you can risk your own money and livelihood on it. The other aspect there is your reputation, which is increasingly, I mean, in 2020, that is so important to so many of us. Our reputations are essentially what we've built our businesses around, right? And I think if you're someone who's, let's say you've just come out of uni, you're ambitious, you're hopeful, you want to make cool stuff, you put up that Kickstarter for a game that you really want to make, and you somehow raise the money, but you've absolutely got the numbers wrong, and you've asked for too little money, and you can never finish that game. Your Google results for your name are going to be associated with this person wasted loads of people's money and was awful and was a liar and was terrible and a fraud, and all of the anger that would generate. And that's a big risk to take early in your career. Likewise, stuff we talked about in terms of like media training and stuff, like, I don't know many 30-year-olds who think their 20-year-old self was like a really cool person that they would be proud to be associated with. I benefited from spending 6 years basically annoying people within games companies, with no one on the outside world knowing I was kind of this pretentious hipster young developer who was annoying everyone. I got media training because I worked at companies with, that did media training just by default. So I got all of that training as well. So there is a benefit to thinking of your first 1 or 2 jobs as incubators in and of themselves. Go and let someone pay you to learn to be good at what you do, and then go and use that experience. That said, as I said at the top of this, like, that's one approach. And the other thing is, of course, when people give advice, they tend to give advice which is do exactly what I did because it worked. I'm happy and comfortable. So definitely take it with a massive pinch of salt. That's what worked for me. Going and kind of having the edges sanded off me for 6 years probably helped me in terms of achieving what I've achieved since then, and still being around and not, annoying the internet or messing up or wasting a publisher a load of money. Those were skills that I learned when doing my thing in bigger companies. So that's the argument. That's the go and get a job in a big company argument, I suppose.
Okay. Just as a reminder that it's not just you and me chatting away, we actually have some questions coming in from the audience by the...
You're recording this?
No, even worse, mate. You are live. You're live,
Oh,
Mike.
no. Oh, no. Hello, everyone. How's it going?
Notorious Films said, I wanted to know, what do people in indie want to know? For example, all their skills are pure 3D and working using Maya, ZBrush, Substance Painter, Designer. Is that desirable? So, guys, what kind of skills should people and what software should people kind of embrace and learn before they go indie, I guess?
I guess it depends on the job you want and the team you've got around you. Ultimately, like, when someone's hiring you, they're looking for 2 things. They're looking for, can this person produce the thing I need more of? So if I'm looking for a character artist, I want someone who can make character art. And also, is this person going to be awful to work with or not? Those are the 2 questions you're basically trying to answer at a basic level. So in terms of the second part, just like be a decent person, I would recommend against putting like incredibly strong anti-Semitic text in your portfolio, which was something someone sent to me the other day. It's like, okay, you're not going to get a job probably working with me. But other than that, like, just be a decent person and treat others well and come across well in those situations. No one's expecting you to be a charismatic hero. Obviously, we're video game nerds. There's a lot of social awkwardness that we all suffer from. That's absolutely fine. But be presentable in that sense and be someone who you can work with others. On the skills basis, basically, you need to have the skills that I need. Selfishly, I want to be nice to the people I work with, but I'm not going to hire anyone that isn't going to plug a gap that I need in production. So ultimately, being good at the thing you do, it doesn't really matter what the thing you do is, as long as it's something that people need and as long as you're very good at it. I often see a lot of portfolios where students who want to go and work at a company like mine or like a smaller level scale studio have been told to just saw someone in chat saying you look like a serial killer, and they're not wrong. It's the shed as well that helps them.
It's the shed. The shed isn't helping.
You gotta have those skills that are useful. I see a lot of students. That's what I was going to say. I see a lot of students who have just kind of got portfolios which are like, here's my design work, here's my code work, here's my artwork, here's my music. This is my acting reel. Like, they've done everything because they know, and they're right in knowing this, that as an indie you often have to know a bit of everything and be able to do lots of other jobs. But if I'm hiring a character artist and I go to your portfolio and I see that you do all these different things, and bluntly, you're not very good at any of them because you're jack of all trades, master of none, I can't hire you for the job I need. However, if you want to be an indie, that's probably the best approach, right? Like, for me, I'm a graphic designer slash coder slash writer. I always forget the writer part, even though that's probably the thing I'm best at out of all those things. I'm terrible at the other things. I've had to do that. That's been how I've had to build a company around myself that basically fills in all the gaps in that skill set, or increasingly has people who are better at the things I'm not so good at. So, for example, like coding, I was good enough to make a couple of games, but I neided other coders to kind of come in and help. So you have to be useful, essentially, and you have to be able to demonstrate that use to me incredibly quickly. If I say on Twitter that I need a new character artist, I'm going to get 100 people send me their portfolios, which means realistically, I'm going to look at your portfolio for like 2 minutes. And you have to be the best person I look at who I think I can afford. I mean, ultimately, that's what it comes down to. I'm then going to make a short list. I usually open up just like text editor and just start typing in names. I'll have like a short list of 5 people. I'll share those 5 people with other people at the company just to kind of see what people think. I'll get that down to a couple of names. I'll call both of them on Skype, and the one who seems like they would get on with the team gets the job. So you have to make it through all of those filters. So yeah.
We have got 10 minutes left, and now the questions are coming in thick and fast.
So, should we do quick fire?
Let's do semi-quick fire. Because some of them may not be yes or no answers. Mimo asks, what can we do about the situation where most big company hires mean you sign away the right to make anything, e.g. indie projects, while you're working there at the company? If I want to get a job at a big company, it feels like I have a binary choice between job security and having the opportunity to break into indie in the future. Is that relevant still? Do people still?
That still happens. That still happens. That's still, I guess that's kind of the default position legally. There's lots of reasons as a company that you do want to do that just to kind of protect yourself. It's not, I wouldn't say that's a necessarily like a those companies are evil situation. That said, there's a few things. One is no one's ever actually managed to kind of enforce one of those rules in court of law, which is worth mentioning, but please don't take that as legal advice. There's also a lot of studios that don't have that policy. If you want to work at that studio, yes, that might be a limitation. Every job is going to have pros and cons. If that's the place you want to work, you're not going to change their policy. You can go and work somewhere else. We have a very loose policy on that because it would be incredibly hypocritical if I had a company that didn't allow people to do the thing that I did. That said, the company I did work at, Blitz, at the time did own everything I made on my spare time, and they had to sign a contract for me, giving me the exclusive rights to Thomas Was Alone so I could go and make more of it. And I'm forever grateful to a guy called Richard Smithies who signed that contract and gave me a career, because they could have just absolutely taken that and owned it, and I would never have gone anywhere.
Common Soul is asking, I'm thinking during my summer holidays to work on a game while I'm also still at uni. Can that benefit me once I leave? Anything you can have made benefits you. Does it demonstrate the skill you want to do in the industry? If you want to be making, so an example for us is this guy on my team called Nick Tringali, who's kind of co-directed and John Wick, and now directs his other things on his side. He made projects, and that was how I found him, as this is someone who makes really cool stuff. I want to work with them. If you want to be an environment artist, go and make some environment art and show it off well to me. Don't be distracted by that. But yeah, if you want to be someone who's directing immediately, that's a route. But again, it's the paper route versus the Vegas option. Like, there are less opportunities to be auteur visionaries in the games industry than there are to be dude who makes crates. And you can be dude who makes crates for a few years and work your way up to auteur visionary. It's a harder path to go and do it the other way. So it's a mishmash. If it's awesome, and awesome work impresses. If it looks good in a GIF on Twitter, that's really useful. But yeah, make sure you're doing the work that gets you the first job that you think you want to do. Make the best damn crates that you can.
There are portfolios that are entirely crates, and those people tend to get work. But really bluntly, and I say this as someone whose first job was placing crates in platforming games, so I say that with experience. You always need someone to put the crate somewhere.
Thumb asks, they missed the earlier games writing panel, and that will actually be available on YouTube, on the official EGX YouTube channel. If you did miss the session, you can go back and watch it. Mike's both a writer and designer. What skills do you think a writer or narrative designer also needs in order to develop to do well as an indie?
I think the biggest challenge you're going to have is very hard to get a job in an indie company as a writer, because every designer secretly believes that they're Hideo Kojima and they can write as well and direct and be basically the superstar. You're basically battling people's own egotistical belief in their own abilities. Again, I say that as someone who was so egotistical in that belief that I wrote Thomas Was Alone, which was the first thing I ever wrote. Unfortunately, the universe did make that game successful, and now I think I'm a writer, unfortunately. And that means probably I'm not going to hire a writer anytime soon, right? Unless we need more writing. So your biggest thing is to basically put yourself in a position where you can be as egotistical as I was. If you want to write indie games, I would encourage you to work out a way that you can ship a game yourself using that skill set. So visual novels are a great way of doing that. There's lots of tools that allow you to make that with very little coding. Making stuff in platforms that doesn't require heavy duty coding, but having some technical skills in your skill set are great. Something like Subsurface Circular is not super impossibly hard to make. especially given some of the third-party tools that exist. So yeah, I'd point you towards being able to get your interactive stories out there, even if that is just Twine games, and then working up from Twine games. Very easy to take Unity and use Unity to make a very pretty wrapper around a Twine game if you want to make something that you can, sell on Steam. I think that would be the route to go down there.
I don't even know how to pronounce that first word. Hui Force. Apologies for mispronouncing your screen name. Does being a university graduate with no experience in the industry give you less of a chance of being hired for a remote-based company like Bithell Games?
Does being a university graduate with no experience? No. It used to, if I'm honest. Like, there was definitely, what you'll find with a lot of indie studios is they're very careful about like hiring, because obviously we're all operating with, we're not millionaires. We're not, we're all kind of making do. So often you go for the safe option. You hire the woman you worked with at a previous job and you want to bring in because she's going to get it done, rather than the junior hire. That's something we kind of identified as a problem at Bithell Games about kind of 2 or 3 years ago when we started bringing in more juniors. And that's gone really well for us. We've got some really talented people on the team for whom this is their first thing out of uni, or like their second thing after like 6 months somewhere else. So that's happening. I'd say that's rarer. It's going to be tricky for you to do. And yeah, your portfolio is going to have to be absolutely amazing. And it's going to have to compete in the marketplace with people who are much more experienced than you. And I think that's a really important thing for anyone graduating. Is it's very easy if you're the best person in your class to get complacent and comfortable and go, well, I'm awesome. Look at everyone else's work. I'm brilliant compared to them. And often the people who are in the games industry were the best in their class at uni, because it's hard to get a job in the games industry. But also, once you're out of uni, you're not competing with people in your class anymore. You're competing with everyone else. So I think looking realistically at the portfolios of everyone else who would realistically be applying for a job with a company like mine is a really good kind of splash of water to the face to maybe, up the quality of what's in there, so that you impress, like I said, me when I've got 2 minutes to look at your portfolio, because I'm a dickhead with an hour to actually do the work.
Fair enough. I apologize now because we've got 3 minutes left. So if I don't get through everyone's questions, I apologize.
I'm sorry, everyone. I ramble.
No, it's fine. That's why we brought you on. It's the rambling. Nimanabi Turbulon asked, what would be a good time to start marketing your game during its cycle? So if you have gone indie, you've started up your studio, you're working on your game, when do you start telling people about it?
So I was chatting to someone about this yesterday, actually, because it's one of the biggest jokes in game dev is that the first screenshot of your game you release will be the artwork that every journalist used throughout development and then post-release. There are I think the major screenshots on Google for Volume, which was the last game I made this mistake on, were released from like a version like a year before release. We changed everything about the art style. Those are the top ranked images on Google, because those are the ones that just journalists kept going back to and using. So you shouldn't share anything, in my opinion, until you would be comfortable with that living on forever. Other than that, I think there's a lot to be said for games that are sharing early. If you look at something like Untitled Goose Game, that clearly worked for them. Kind of having a community who's excited about the development of the thing you're making works. We're a bit more old school in our approach. We tend to like do the classic, announce it 6 months before release, 3 months before release. With the circular games, we released it the day of. We're planning on doing that in future again, like just dropping stuff. But that requires a level of attention that the average kind of student isn't going to have, right? The reason I can do a game where we just drop it from nowhere is because we have the attention we have. So please don't emulate that. You can't Beyonce until you're Beyonce. I'm not saying I'm Beyonce. I want to be very clear. I've not attained that level in my career yet. One day I'll be Beyonce.
Okay, the mysterious technical directory voice in the background has given us an extension to 10.2, so I can try and get through a few more questions.
Oh, fantastic.
Zubi Ahmed, and I apologize again for any mispronunciations. What are your 3 short key pieces of advice from 30-year-old you to 20-year-old you about setting up or not setting up an indie studio? What would you tell young Mike?
Chill out, first of all. I was very driven, and that's awesome, and that's the benefit of youth. But I also was awful to work with, just terrible. I've had so many kind of mates and acquaintances like take me to one side, actually in the last couple of years, and be like, "Wow, you used to be a horrible human being." I don't think I was ever like abusive or awful, but I was definitely just very kind of arrogant and thought I was going to fix the games industry. And I think there's that kind of 20-something vibe, early 20s, where you just think everyone's an idiot except you. or at least that was how it was for me. So definitely chill out on that, grow up a bit. Grow up just a little bit faster. That would be my advice to young me. The other stuff, I think, yeah, patience and understanding that this is a career, that we're all in this for the marathon. You know, you don't have to be a superstar overnight, and that doesn't make you a failure if it takes you a while to learn. There are plenty of examples in the games industry of people who've made their excellent game that you've heard of, like in their 40s, 50s. Like it doesn't have to happen immediately. Essentially, as long as you can survive and look after yourself and keep making stuff you enjoy making and learning from it, then it doesn't have to be immediate. And no one's ever really is in the way that you raise. That there's usually a backstory that you don't know about, that they've been doing it for 10 years beforehand. And then a third piece of advice, yeah, find the thing that you can do. It's the thing I said earlier, the thing that you can do that no one else can do, or the thing that no one's tried yet. Thomas Was Alone worked because nobody had the nerve to release a game that used programmer art before. And by just making the programmer art a little bit better, by doing some color theory and making sure that the shapes worked and making it a little prettier, I got away with making a game that had programmer art that was just rectangles. No one can do that again, or at least they can, but they'd have to change things around a lot. That was an opportunity I spotted, and I made a game. And if you can find that, if you can spot something, then why has no one else made a game that does X, Y, Z? Why has no one made a game that's focused on this obscure genre of Spanish films that I love? Why has no one made a game that's about my specific hometown? Why has no one ever made a game that uses this piece of technology that's completely underused in the Unity engine? You know, finding those opportunities would also be the thing. Being open to that, not just copying what you're playing. I saw in the last panel someone saying about going beyond video games for your writing inspiration. That's true of every aspect of game development, design, production. Look at how things work in other industries. Just try and be an open, big sponge for any idea you can get. Nice. Those are my three.
Bryn says, does not having a degree but having a reasonably deep portfolio lessen your chances of getting hired? I had to drop out of uni due to chronic illness, and now I'm concerned I may have scuppered myself.
No, I've hired people who didn't go to uni. I bluntly, personally don't care. I work with plenty of people. I care about like you as a person and what you can do. I care about you as a person more, but I'll be your friend rather than hiring you unless you're not great. The work matters, and having a portfolio that's clear, that's concise. You know, the word deep in that question worries me a little bit. Like, I don't need to see 50 pieces. I need to see 5 pieces that are mind-blowing. I think often, especially with students, because you've not made much stuff yet, you feel like your portfolio needs to be stuffed with absolutely everything you ever made. You're basically as good as the worst thing I see from you in my head. You know, think about when you imagine a person you've met, right? You're figuring out them based on the information available to you. And I only have a short amount of time. So if I see something bad in your portfolio, I'm going to think that's bad. And I'm also going to think that you think it's good enough to put in your portfolio, which is going to worry me. That you maybe don't have taste, and that good thing that I like is maybe an accident, and you don't realize the difference between the good and the bad in your portfolio. So I'd be very careful with that, keep it concise. In terms of university degrees, I'm aware that's, again, a regional thing. Like in America, I've heard, like, if you don't have a degree, that kind of can scupper you later in your career and do weird stuff. But as an employer, I couldn't care less what your education level is. I care what you are right now when I'm hiring you.
Nice. I'm going to throw in the last question, and it is the titular question of this session. Should you go indie after uni?
Yes and no.
Lovely. Yeah, Thank you for that.
I think that if there's one takeaway from this, it's that there's pros and cons to any decision you're ever going to make. This is exactly like that. There's going to be someone who watches this who's like, you know what, that does sound risky to go indie. I'm going to go and get a job at Rockstar, work my ass off for 10 years, work my way up through the ranks, then go and make a game, and they're going to make the next mega awesome indie AA game. And there's going to be someone who's watching this video who thinks I'm an idiot from a different era, who doesn't know what they're talking about, and they're absolutely right on all those points. And they're going to go away and they're going to make a game in a weekend that blows everyone away and starts their career. Like, ultimately, you have to weigh up everything that's presented, and also just be very skeptical of all the information you're receiving. Remember that the information I'm giving is based on my experiences 10 years ago in the industry, and that it's also very much going to be about me assuming that every choice I made that got me to the point where I'm happy and comfortable is the right choice. So yeah, just broaden your horizons in terms of who you're listening to, get as much information as you can, and make the decision makes sense for you. I know it's a kind of a non-answer. I apologize. I don't know if that's from a narrative point of view. I was hoping for a stronger kind of ending for you, but that's all I've got. I'm sure.
It's fine. It's fine. I'll make do with what we got. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to everyone who's in the chat who offered questions. That is all we've got time for. Thank you everyone who tuned in. I'm going to be back at 3 o'clock. The rest of the GamesIndustry.biz team are going to be joining me. We're going to be on a live podcast where we're going to be answering questions about the games business, about the industry, where it's going in 2020 and beyond. If you've got a question, by all means, tweet at GIBiz, and we'll hopefully kind of get through it, or join us live in the chat like you did just now. Res Digital continues over at res.com with the Eurogamer team are playing the new DLC for Control, a game I still haven't played but really want to.
You should.
By all means, head over to res.com for that. Until then, that's me done for now. Thank you very much.